Nadia Lee Owens, and welcome back to Bi Black and Bookish, a channel where a bi black girl who reads too much kind of forgets she has a Booktube channel. Well, not really. It's just I haven't been reading all that much for the last month because depression is a bitch. But so I haven't really been having the time or energy to really sit down and read. But now I'm in a manic state. So get ready for my review of the Shades of Magic Trilogy by F.E. Schwab. I mentioned the first book, A Darker Shade of Magic, in my first real video where I ranked the male and female protagonists from 5 different books. And Kel and Lila were pretty middle in the ranking because they are middle road characters. I have no hate or love for these characters. I just think they're there. And they're doing their thing, and that's okay. But my favorite character is actually Holland from this series, mainly because whenever I picture him, I picture Nanami from Jujutsu Kaisen, but we'll get into that later. First, I'm just going to do a quick summary and review of the first 2 books. In the first book, Kel, our main protagonist, is an Antari, which is a type of a magician that can travel between these 3 main worlds. And they are also noted by, they have a completely black eye. He is the adopted son of the royal family from Red London, which is a world that has magic overflowing. And it is because he's adopted that Kel has this whole, I don't know where I come from. I have no remembrance of where or who I truly am. My adoptive parents use me as a tool for their own benefits, blah, 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 sort of thing that has going on, where he decides to do stupid shit and smuggle items from the different worlds, which is apparently treason. So in White London, Kel gets tricked by the twin rulers, Aster and Athos, and their Antari, who's basically under their control and has no free will. And his name is Holland. And this is my personal favorite character because he's so sad, so tragic, so pathetic. There's just something about this very depressing man that makes me love him so and just want the best for him. But anyway, they trick him into bringing this item from Black London, which is a world that magic kind of destroyed it. And they trick him to bringing this item, which is called Vantari, which basically just means magic and can do any sort of magic they want. And so it's very powerful. And they want it, but Kel's like, this belongs in Black London. So he runs off into Grey London, which is the London that's basically in our world. And it's there that he meets our female protagonist, Lila Bard. Lila Bard is a thief and a wannabe pirate, and she gives off a lot of girl bossy energy. And but in my opinion, she kind of stops being the female protagonist by the 3rd book, because she just starts feeling like more of a secondary protagonist than a main one. Because once you figure out her secret, once it's revealed, there's really nothing else about her character that's really all that interesting besides her romantic relationship with Kel, I guess. And even that, I didn't like the romances, but we'll get more into that later. Together, they work their way from Grey to Red London, and then to White, all while being chased by my boy Holland. And also this Vantari magic starts possessing people in Red London and ends up burning them out and basically killing them. While in Red London, Kel's adoptive brother, Rai, who's the crown prince, he ends up being possessed by Astrid, the girl twin from White London. And just as she leaves his body, she ends up stabbing him in the heart, and he does basically die, but Kel uses like powerful magic in order to create a link between them where Rai lives as long as Kel lives. In White London, Kel and Lila have this final showdown between the twins, and ends up murking them both. And also Holland sort of dies, and so Kel just throws him into Black London, like, okay, bye, along with the magic stone. But of course, my homeboy ain't dead. He ain't dead. He know we're gonna die. Then they go back into Red London, and Kel goes back to the palace, and Lila goes off to the docks in order to fulfill her dreams of being a pirate or whatever. In my opinion, Darker Shade of Magic is the best one in the trilogy, and I did end up rating it 4 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. One of the things that bothers me the most about this book and kind of like the series at whole is the fact that there's just so few significant female characters. After they kill off Astrid, other than Lila and maybe the Queen, there's really no other important female characters. There are female characters that are background characters. They come and go. They come as easily as they leave. But other than that, it just doesn't feel very like feminist, I guess I can say. Not really feminist, but just not very kind of the vibe that you expect from a book that has a character like Lila, who, like I said, gives off a lot of girl boss energy. So I was just kind of disappointed. I also feel as if Kel overcame the magic from the Ventari stone a little bit too easily when it possessed him, like right in the end. All he had to do was basically say the Antari word for dispel or something like that, and that was it. That's how they vanquished the big bad in this one. It just kind of felt like a little bit of a, oh, why didn't you think to do that like 200 pages ago? So that was kind of a letdown. But I did absolutely enjoy the world building in this first book, because I really appreciate when a writer just kind of pushes a reader in the world that they've created, especially in a fantasy book, and they don't spend a lot of time on exposition right in the like first few chapters. I feel as if that's a lot of mistake that new writers did. I know, because I used to make that mistake, or I'll just like exposition after exposition just so you can really know the worlds of this beautiful world that I created. And I don't really think that's needed. And I also think that's kind of disrespecting the intelligence of your readers. So I think if you just push them, you just kind of gradually explain it as needed. That's the best way to introduce the reader into a fantasy world. And I'll be mentioning this a lot, especially in the third book, but I really do find the brotherly relationship between Kel and Rai very cute and adorable. They just really love each other. They're brothers, Your Honor. It's really cute. And I honestly feel as if it's kind of, and I think the writer also starts to realize how Kel's most important relationship isn't necessarily with Lila, this girl that he just had a crazy weekend with, but actually with Rai, his adoptive brother, because she starts putting a lot more emphasis in it, and it's especially noticeable in the third book. The second book is A Gathering of Shadows, and it is the worst book in the trilogy in my opinion, because nothing in it matters. I'm going to list the only few kind of important tidbits that you need to know in the second one. because the very last few events of the second book does lead into what happens in the third. So first of all, Lila is on a ship with this dude named Alucard Emery. And yes, I am picturing Alucard from Castlevania, because if you're going to name your character Dracula backwards, I'm going to be thinking about Dracula's son. So apparently, Alucard Emery used to be Rye's lover, who left him heartbroken. Even though I did had zero kind of sense that Rye was heartbroken based on the first book, but I guess he was. And Alucard is also teaching Lila how to use magic, and she's starting to get a hang of it, getting even more girl boss than she's already was. Holland is, of course, back from Black London, and he is now the king of White London, because while he was in Black London, he ended up striking a deal with this magic being called Ozeron, and so they're now sharing a body back in White London. But Ozeron's starting to getting a little antsy. He wants more. So Holland strikes a deal with him, saying, "Hey, I can find you another Antari, and if he accepts you willingly, you can take his body, but if not, you can possess me." So, more trauma for my boy Holland. It was hinted at in the first book, but even more so in this book, that Lila could possibly be an Antari from Grey London, because it is noted in the first book that she has a missing eye that was replaced by glass, and also because she was actually able to travel with Kale to Red London and didn't get absolutely destroyed, that she could possibly be an Antari. So it is hinted at throughout the book, and that's the reason why she has this powerful untapped magic. It was also in this book that I felt that Kale's feeling of being an outsider in his family was a bit more valid, because after the events of the previous book, the king and the queen start treating him more like a prisoner in the palace rather than a son. So he starts also getting really even more emo than he was in the first book. And his brother is also getting very emo because he did die, in all fairness. But everything I talked about was mentioned kind of sparingly throughout these, like, I don't know, like 400 pages. And the last part, which I would say was about 30 pages, is where all the action is, and that's where everything happens that leads directly into the third and final book. Most of the second book is dedicated to like this magical Olympics like game called the Element Games that served no other function other than bringing Lila and Alucard back into Red London. The book ends with Kel and being stripped from his magic in White London by this device that Holland put on him. And he didn't allow Ozeron to possess him, so Holland ended up getting possessed instead, of course. Gotta constantly treat my boy dirty. And because Kel doesn't have his magic, Rye starts dying in Red London because that's what has been keeping him alive. And so in order to save both Kel and Rye, Lila decide to try to save Kel in White London. And that's where it ends, Lila gearing up for White London. I ended up giving this book 2 out of 5 stars because, like I said, I thought it was very boring. Not very boring, just very filler. And filler can be fun sometimes, but not for me. I want to get to the meat and bones of the story. I don't want you to waste my time with 500 pages of fluff. So I thought it would be fun to write down predictions that I have for the final book. And honestly, I think I did a pretty good job. Um, I did kind of overestimate Grey London's role in all this. I should have known better that nothing important would ever happen in Grey London. It stopped existing basically in the second book. So here they are. Lila's and Tari. I feel as if this is pretty obvious. Anyone could have saw this coming based from like the first book, really. Um, the king is going to die, so Rye has to become a king. And then I noted that someone is going to die, but it's not going to be any of the main characters, and I can kind of consider this to be kind of like the main couple, Alucard and Rye, and Lila and Kel. Kel is going to leave London and travel the world with Lila, or kind of like an Uno reverse of their relationship. Lila stays in London and Kel leaves. Rye and Alucard reconcile their relationship with sort of Kel's blessing, because Kel does not like Alucard. He's like, you broke my brother's heart. How could you do this? Blah 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 blah. I also noted that he may die protecting Rye, but again, I highly doubt they were going to kill anyone in the main couple. But I thought that might be like kind of spicy. So I noted that Black London may open up again, or White London closes. Basically, what happened to Black London is going to happen to White London, or just general magic is restored to all Londons. This may come at a risk of Red London becoming less powerful, and this is me once again kind of overestimating the role that Grey London has. I said Kel becomes fully possessed by Ozeron, and Lila is going to have to talk him out of it like she did in the first book. Kel and Lila acknowledge that they have romantic feelings for each other, but for some reason they cannot enter a relationship just yet. I did also note they do have sex though. That is very important. They do bone. I wrote down, I want Holland to have a happy and healthy life, but I know he's going to die. And parentheses, maybe sacrifice himself to stop Ozeron. I noted that King George may be promoted to minor villain. King George is the king from Grey London. Once again, they don't fucking matter. I just kind of expected more. Also, I noted that the presence of Ozeron may start a war with other countries. I was kind of right with that. A little, but we'll get into that. Final book, A Conjuring of Light, starts immediately after the events of the previous book, with Lila going to White London in order to save Kel, but she gets there a little bit too late because Rye does just straight up die. He gets murked. At first, I was actually legitimately concerned that they were going to kill off Rye, because he is my second favorite character, after my boy Holland, of course. But thankfully, as soon as Kel got his magic back, Rye spontaneously came back to life, which must have been traumatizing. Dying twice and coming back to life, it really did mess up his brain throughout this book. It was while I was reading this particular part that I started to realizing just how important the relationship between Kel and Rye has started to become, compared to the relationship between Kel and Lila, which you would think would be the most important relationship. A bit later, they even have Kel and Rye parallel ancient mythology about man and magic, where Rye is man and Kel is magic. It gave me a familial version of Merlin and Arthur from BBC Merlin. It almost makes me wish that Rye was the other main character besides Lila, because like I said, at this point, I felt as if Lila has been demoted to secondary character. She's kind of like on the same level of Alucard at this point. Of course, having confirmed that Lila could get into White London, she's confirmed to be an Antari. But like I said, it's something anyone could have saw coming, even mid first book. I thought there would be more build up before Ozeron took over Red London, but it was pretty much immediate. Ozeron abandons Holland's body and starts spreading this like mind-washing fog all throughout London, and so anyone who could started retreating into the palace. It had me wondering how the writer was going to be filling out the rest of the 500 pages, because this book was, I think, like 630 pages long. So I was like, what are you going to do now? And the answer was apparently a lot of flashbacks. Every character had some sort of flashback, but especially Holland. And so you can just really know just how sad and pathetic his life was. Just filled with like a dead brother, a dead dad, deadbeat mom. He even has not one, but two fridged lovers. The first one being his, like, I guess, girlfriend or fiance, who he fridged himself because she was going to fridge him first. And the second one being his quote-unquote best friend, who was the previous king before Astrid and Athos, the twins from the first book. And they were said to be, like, best friends, but I feel as if they fucked once. And he's dead, so that also makes him a fridged lover. In the second act, the three Antari, Alucard, and this pirate lady that they came across during like a rescue mission in London, left in order to retrieve a vessel that could take and give magic, and they were going to use it to contain Ozeron, who himself is magic. I felt like compared to the first act, the second act is pretty boring. It doesn't really pick up until just towards the end of the second act, when everyone starts dying and betraying each other. So the king and queen die, as I predicted, after this prince and princess of this other country tries to stage a coup, and this is where I was like, kind of right. And the pirate lady betrays Alucard and the Antares, which leads to the death of this guard guy that they were with that I completely forgot about. So of course his character is not important. This leads to the third act, where Rai faces off to Ozeron for some reason, even though he has zero magic. And so Kel and Lila and Holland go off to save him and defeat Ozeron once and for all. They manage to trick Ozeron into possessing Holland, so they can trap Ozeron along with Holland's magic in the device. But there were some flashbacks in the middle of the action that I thought sort of messed with the flow. Kel hides the device in Grey London for some reason. And when Kel takes Holland back to White London, because he's powerless now, he's no longer an Antari, I believe Holland just straight up dies. It was very vague and just very reminiscent of Jet dying in Avatar in its vagueness. Also, in how I predicted, Kel and Lila leave London together to see the world, and that's how a Conjuring of Light ends, and that's the conclusion for the Shades of Magic trilogy. I ended up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars. It started off pretty strong. I did like the beginning, it was very action-packed, a lot going on. I was like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Oh no, my baby boy Rye. Oh no, my baby boy Holland. But then it kind of fell off in the middle and ended with a lukewarm ending, in my opinion. Overall, I'll give the trilogy as a whole 3 out of 5 stars. Because like the final book, the first book was very solid. The second book was a letdown, and the third book was simply meh. but I don't think it's because the trilogy is necessarily bad. In a lot of ways, I can understand the hype behind this series. Everywhere I looked online, they're like, "Oh, this is great. This is great. Lila's great. Kel's great. Oh, I love Ryan. I love her. They're so cute together." And in a lot of ways, I kind of saw that in the book, and I can understand why there are people who are big fans of this series. I just think I've really grown out of this kind of genre. I was kind of hoping for a little bit more since it's new adult, but it still just felt like every other kind of fantasy YA book. It no longer holds my interest like it would have 10 years ago. I would recommend the first book, A Darker Shade of Magic, because, like I said, it was a pretty solid book on its own. And if you never read the other two, I'll say you're not missing out on much. Well, that's all she wrote. Let me know if you've read the Shades of Magic trilogy and what's your opinion on it in the comments below, or talk to me on Twitter or Instagram at Lee Owens. Hope to see you next month where I read another popular fantasy trilogy, Shadow and Bone. Bye!